Now, staying with coalition talks, I'm joined by political analyst Dirk Kotze. Mr. Kotze, thank you very much for your time. So the clock is ticking essentially, 257 councils to convene their first sittings. But if we check the back and forth right now, there's great uncertainty in terms of those hung municipality, and particularly after what we heard from the EFF saying they will not be entering into any coalition agreements with the African National Congress. What's your take on this?
Well, it limits their options obviously very much because from the DAs and the DA groups that they have met yesterday, there's also not very much appetite for the EFF. So it's going to be very, very important to see how they are going to position themselves for the coming few days until the 23rd. I think what we are seeing at the moment is a bit of posturing by all the political parties. The meeting of yesterday, the announcements today, and the press conferences or the press announcements, that media announcements that they've made. And I think it is aimed at trying to give more momentum to their different strategies. What we've heard, we should not necessarily take literally. It is part of positioning in negotiations, and there's very tough negotiations that still have to come towards the 23rd. And I expect that in some cases it will go right up to the last moment before we will have a conclusion on what's going to happen.
And then what do you make of the tone, though, of the EFF's leader? I mean, Malema was somewhat humble and willing to make a few concessions from what I saw on television, as somebody who went on to say that in the situation of perhaps the land expropriation without compensation, this is a non-negotiable for them as a political party, but not necessarily insofar as another political party is concerned. Something that was confusing, to be honest with you, because if I'm saying a non-negotiable for me is respect, clearly it means beyond myself in relation to other people. I expect that respect or I go. So I'm not quite sure what he meant there, that this is a non-negotiable for the EFF, not necessarily a non-negotiable for other parties that enter into some sort of an agreement with the EFF. What was your take on that?
Well, I think it is already early signs that they are going to make some move away from the strict interpretations of their original demands or their original positions, because many of these positions are actually very much part of their national policy. It's not so much tied to only local government specifically. Now, they have obviously an explanation for that is the very essence of the EFF, and they cannot separate those from where they stand on local government. But I think what we've seen with the EFF is that their starting position was a very hard position. They also work with what is now the approach of the Patriotic Alliance, and that is to try to develop a package deal, and that is to negotiate not only for individual municipalities or councils, but to look at it more from a provincial or even a national point of view and link different councils with each other, and what we've seen now in the case of the Karoo municipalities. But if you look at the combination of their principles plus this approach, it makes it exceptionally difficult to negotiate with them. Because what the intention of it is obviously, because they haven't won any of these councils on their own, is really to get ultimately a disproportionate sort of deal out of such negotiations.
But then what about the argument of the low-hanging fruits? Because it seemed the EFF now said, you know what, in as much as you cannot negotiate with us on land or perhaps scrapping of education, scrapping of the debt for the students. If that cannot be attained, at the very least, if we're talking the STEM, this is a low-hanging fruit, which some have argued that if you look at this, its visual equivalent in the form of the flag has been done away with. Perhaps you could do away with the STEM. It's not a matter of doing away with Afrikaans. You could have new lyrics. That on its own, they couldn't even get a concession on that. What was your take on Malema's conversation around those low-hanging fruits such as the STEM and the dispersing of sanitary pads?
You know, there's a big gulf between what the EFF presents in terms not about the issues themselves, but the package that they present. all the other political parties are talking about local government issues, about how to structure a new dispensation for better service delivery, how they are trying to deal with the issues of local economic development, dealing with the issues about corruption at local government level, of how to improve the quality of governance, of local governance. So it's a vast difference between what all the other parties are talking about versus that of the EFF. And to bring those two together is exceptionally difficult. And what we are seeing is, I think it's not only about these issues. I mean, this negotiations is not about what is on paper. It is also about the history of that developed over time. And I think for the DA, the reason why they said at a very early stage, even before these matters became public, is it's based on our experience with the EFF over the past 5 years. And we couldn't come together with him, and therefore it became very difficult to trust him in another relationship of a coalition government.
And then the Democratic Alliance, insofar as the metros are concerned, we know that Johannesburg is going to be a bit of a challenge. We listened to Steenhuisen a bit earlier now, particularly with the Patriotic Alliance deciding to go into a coalition agreement with the African National Congress. What do you make of that? Because they still don't sound defeated. They're saying they're still going to push ahead. Do you think we could see a change there, maybe where the Patriotic Alliance decides to go with the DA?
Well, I think that the two councils, Johannesburg and Nelson Mandela Bay, are the two tough ones. In the case of Tshwane, it looks as if there is a way out. There is a combination of parties that can form a coalition. And I think the same will, to a large extent, be the case in Ekurhuleni. But in the case of Johannesburg, it is very much a toss-up at this stage. And what really complicates the negotiations is now the relationship between the ANC and the EFF. If they were closer together, it would have been much easier for them to be able to ultimately constitute a coalition. In the case of Nelson Mandela Bay, because the DA and the ANC received exactly the same number of seats, 48, and the EFF is a strong presence there, it would have looked like that the one who's going to be able to align with the EFF will be able to form a coalition. Now, both sides, both the ANC and the EFF, are excluded from the ANC and the DA from cooperation with the EFF. So it makes it exceptionally difficult. And that is why I think closer to the deadline, we are going to see some moves where what has been said just
We seem to have lost Professor Dirk Kotze there, but certainly a very interesting conversation, and we'll keep you updated on those coalition conversations.